Okay. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yoma Daf Chaf Hey. We are continuing with the machloikes between Av Nachman and Absheshes regarding do the Kahanim who entered the lottery hoping to win, were they wearing already their big day kodesh while in the lottery? So is the Shita of Absheshes. Rav Nachman holds that during the lottery they were wearing big day choil. And as we learned on Amud Beis, Chavdalad Amud Beis, each one gives their rationale. We're going to continue with learning a brayso that apparently will be the base of the sheet of Rav Sheshes, but on the other hand, it will not refute the opinion of Rav Nachman. We will be learning a little bit more about the Lishkas Hagazes. Lishkas Hagazes is one of the chambers that were built into the northern wall of the Azara. It's called Gazes, means hewn stones, cut stones, as we explained, that we were not allowed to bring any metal instruments on Harabayis. So stones that needed to be prepared, needed to be cut to go into the building of the Beis HaMikdash, during the remodeling, they needed to be cut somewhere outside Harabayis, and then they were stored somewhere in the temple complex, available when needed. In that chamber, which was used also to store these stones, which is why it was called Lishkas Hagazes, it was there that the Sanhedrin sat. And as we will see, part of that chamber was in the area known as Kodesh. That means it was in the area that was part of the Azara proper. And part of that chamber was outside, was in an area that was defined as Choil, with more details about that. Now, the Mishnah that we will have on Daf Chafei is going to begin speaking about the second pious. Right, we learned on Daf Chav Beis at the end of the Mishnah that there were a total of 4 lotteries made during the day. And they were dafka not made all together because we wanted to bring excitement in the house of God. And this brought about excitement. The first pious was the pious that was made for the Trumas Hadeshin. And now we begin learning about the second pious. We're going to learn that actually 13 avodos were given out during the second lottery, connected to the morning Talmud, but 13 different avodas. We're going to have a question as to the kohen that won the shchita. The Mishnah speaks about the next kohen that won the merit to throw, to apply, to place the blood on the mizbeach, the zrika. The Mishnah doesn't mention anything about Kabbalah, really, nor about Hoylacha. So the Gemara is going to want to know which one of these 2 Kehanim got the merit to do the Kabbalah. Was the Shoichet the one also doing Kabbalah? Or as the Maskana will be, it was the Zoyrek was the one that did Kabbalah. And actually, we spoke about that before already. That indeed, only the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, he was the only one that needed to do Shechita and Kabbalah, which made his act of Shechita more pressured, because he actually didn't even finish the entire Shechita. He shechted the minimum needed, which is quite a lot. And then someone else took over, allowing him to do the Kabbalah. As we'll speak out, it's lechatchila, ideal to receive in the Mizrach, in the cup, all of the lifeblood, which would demand of you to put the cup near the neck of the incision, near the incision, as soon as possible, which makes it a lot harder for the shochet to do the Kabbalah. And indeed, like we said, the Zoydik is the one that receives with the honor of Zerika already the honor to do the Kabbalah, Ubederach Mamela Pshita, the honor of doing the Hoylacha. And finally, very interesting machlokes. As we will see, that part of the avodah of the morning Talmud was actually bringing the limbs of the dismembered animal on top of the Mizbeach. Really, we learned in Talmud it was done in phases. It wasn't right away brought up and thrown on the fire. It was brought up and then placed on the lower half of the ramp, because especially in the morning, there was a lot of davening that needed to happen. And after they placed the limbs on the lower half of the ramp, they went and they davened, as we learned in Talmud, parts of davening, parts of the Shemona Esrei as well. And then they would go back and they would put it all the way up on the fire, whether those were the same Kohanim, whether those were other Kohanim, that's discussed more in Talmud. What we will have over here is speaking about bringing up of the limbs. Let's at least speak about the first part of it. And we're going to have, imagine, our Mishnah giving you a seder of which Kohen brought up which limbs first. So there is the order of our Mishnah. And on Daf Chaf Hey Amud Beis, we're going to learn a brayso that gives no less than 4 other opinions aside of the opinion of our Mishnah. And that will be of tremendous significance. Just to say the words, one says that the seder of the limbs were brought derech hiluchai. Derech hiluchai means that when the animal is alive, Pashat, look at the animal from the head, from the front until the back. So you follow that order, as we'll see. The other gives the seder of hefshetoi. When they would skin the animal, after they would take off the head, they would hang the animal by the leg. We also learned this in Talmud. And they would skin it from the back side to the front. So it will be in the seder of the hefshet. The third option will be derech nituchai, the order of how they dismembered it. And the final shita will be derech iluyoi. We bring on the altar those parts that are considered more chashuv, that are of greater quality. And in that, we'll have a sub-machloikis at the end. What is considered something of greater quality? A limb that has more meat on it, or a limb that has more fat on it? Gavaldik. We'll speak at the end. This is learning Hasidus at least gives us an inkling of how to understand these four shitas. It's connected to the Dalad Oilamas, as we'll explain. Asiya, Yitzira, Bria, and Atzilus. What level of the source of the animal are we trying to connect to? And Chevra, much more. Let us start on the Chafei Amid Aleph. We are 10 lines from the top of the Amid. Again, the machlekes is during the lottery itself, were the Kehanim dressed already in their big day Kodesh, which is the Shita of Rab Sheshes, and now Amar Rab Sheshes, Mina Aminolah. All right, aside of the Svara that he had, and what was the Svara of Rab Sheshes, that if they will be dressed in big day Choil, the winners of the lottery will for sure have such excitement that, wow, I won, they're going to run and do it right away. They might do it with the big day Choil. Remember that? And Rav Nachman had felt the opposite. Rav Nachman felt that if they will be already wearing big day Kodesh, then the loser will chop it. Since he won't have to get dressed for it, he's already ready, like who's going to stop him? So that was the machlekes. Now that's the logical machlekes, and now everyone is going to have a source machlekes, and this will be the Tanya, the Raya, lit up sheshes that they were wearing big day kodesh. Says the Braisa, Lishkas Hagazis, and the name of the chamber was the chamber of the cut stones. Was Kemin Basiliki Gedoyla Hoysam, right? A basilica. It was a very large chamber. And Chavra, we're speaking here about the payos, the lottery was made bimizracham. It was made, now the lishka itself was built in the northern wall of the Azara. But being that it was a very large chamber, so if we are looking at the length of the chamber, length meaning going from east to west, it was done more towards the eastern part of the chamber. And V'zaken Yoshev b'Marava, but there was always an elder, a Talmud Chacham, a member of the Sanhedrin that was available to show people or to enlighten people with the procedure of the pious. This is not the memuna. This is not the kohen in the middle doing the actual count. You have like a supervisor making sure it's done kahalach. So the zaken would sit. He would sit b'marav. Now that will be a key word today, because we know that one other than the kings of the household of David were not allowed to sit in the azara. We'll get to that in a moment. Now, the kohanim that wanted to win, to get the schus of doing that stage, that step of the avodah. They were mukafim vo'emdim kamin b'choyliyar. They were standing in a circle, like a certain ornament that women wore that was called the b'choyliyar. It's a brooch, something that they would put on their garments. Bekitza, they stood in a circle. The hamamuna and the administrator, he would come in the center, and he would remove the hat of one of the kohanim. Why would he remove the hat? That was how we determined from whom would he start counting. Now the continuation is not quoted here. We actually already learned above that everyone would extend a finger, right? And if they were unable to extend one finger, then they were allowed to extend two fingers, but never the thumb. The Memuna would shout out a very large number, much larger than the number of the kohanim, and he would start counting from the kohen whose hat was removed. Now, whenever we learned this a few days ago, just that came out of my mouth something that I have to correct. I said he was wearing a yarmulke. No, they were not wearing a yarmulke, because one was not allowed to have anything interposing between the big day kahuna and the body of the kohen, which is why Tosfos says over here, that why did they make this pious in a chamber? Why didn't they do it in the Azara proper? So Tosfos says, because since the Seder was to remove the hat, even though no one was walking, but still to stand in the Azara with an uncovered head was completely disrespectful to God. So they did it in the chamber. Interesting. And for that moment, he was without a yarmulke. Now there's a machlokes in Rishonim. Did it stay off for a longer time, or was it just a quick removal and a replacement? Many people today, a Fruma today, would be very uncomfortable to be one moment without a yarmulke. Tell you even more than that, when we learned just at the end of yesterday's sugya that that the first garment that the Kohen would put on would be his pants. Like today, when we leave the mikveh, what's the first garment that people put on? We put on the yarmulke. That's a big topic connected to the sugya over here. But let's come back over here. End of quote. Now says the Gemara, this is all the proof that Rav Sheshes, if Rav Nachman would be right, then mitznefes bebigdei choil meika. I mean, everyone covers their head, but the word mitznefes is the name of the hat that the kohanim wore as their bigdei kahuna. And here, they didn't begin the lottery yet. Gavalde kadaya. So the fact that the mitznefes was removed is a proof that they were all garbed in bigdei kodesh. Now, this is, first of all, a great proof, but it becomes a problem. It becomes almost a refutation to Rav Nachman. So Rav Nachman is going to have to show that Lav Dafka doesn't refute him. Says the Gemara, no, Ika, that even while one is wearing, we'll see in a moment what bigdei choil means. Sometimes kohanim would be wearing a mitznefes before they got dressed with the bigdei kodesh that was in those special lockers. Remember the 96 lockers in the Beis HaMikdash. Kid the Tani Rav Yehuda, or other people say this was taught by Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda. Listen to this: that kohen she'asasaloi imoy kutaines, that if a mother of a kohen made the garments for the kohanim, not for donated to everyone, she made the bigdei kahuna for her son. Obviously, she has to give it over. She has to donate it to the temple. But still, they were made by the mother for a specific kohen, says either Rav Yehuda or Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda, says the Brisa taught by them, Oivid ba avodas yachid. It's amazing. They are allowed to do avodas yachid, but they're not allowed to do avodas tzibur. Now, this is a gavaldik. So let's go with Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman holds that they would wear bigdei choil. But even according to Rav Nachman, the kohen that had these garments from his mother made for him was allowed to wear it. Let me explain to you why. Let's go back. Why did Rav Nachman say they wore bigdei choil? What was his fear? That if they are already wearing bigdei kodesh, then even the one that lost will chap the avodah. In these garments, he was not allowed to do karbanos tzibur. We're speaking about the tamid, right? We're speaking about the tumas hadeshen. That's an avodah tzibur. The next piece is about the tamid. That's avodah tzibur. So on one hand, it's called the mitznefes, because actually he's allowed to do avodas yachid with it and had the name of a mitznefes. But even let Rav Nachman, he will be allowed to wear it because no one can do the communal avodah with it. It's gavaldik. So you can have a mitzias where someone is wearing a mitznefes. Now this is obviously a little bit of a doichik, but every kohen was wearing a mitznefes. And no, the guy that came in with the mitznefes, so the memuna took off his hat. Maybe it even adds more seichel. Why would you b'chal take off a hat? Because to show them that this is, if you win, you can't wear these begadim, even though they look like they are similar to, they belong, they were donated to the tzibur. You can do your own carbon with it if you want. But anyway, so it's shaykh to have bigdei choil, because you can't do the tzibur with it, even though it's kodesh enough for carbon yachid, and you have a mitznefes. Okay, done. So now that we quoted this brisa that spoke about the lottery that was done in the Lishkas HaGazis, Omar Abaye, Shmami, no, I have a proof from this brisa, two dinim. Number one, Lishkas HaGazis, that this chamber was Chetziyah B'Kodesh v'Chetziyah B'Choil. Again, it was built in the wall of the Azara. Now, we already gave through the measurements in Midrash. We had it a few daf ago. So the length of the Azara meaning the Ezra's Machna Shechina. Machna Shechina is not the Ezra's Nashim. That's really Kedushas Harabayis. We're speaking, remember, the 187 amos in the length and the 135 amos in the width. And so the chamber that was built in the northern part of the Azara, some of it was in those measurements. It was actually, half of it was B'Kodesh, but half of it was B'Choil. And leave the picture, this is a great picture. Because when you tell a person, when you're going from east to west, when you're saying that a chamber was half b'kodesh, half b'choil, what goes into people's minds is that the chamber is also divided from east to west, leaving the southern half of the chamber b'kodesh and the northern half of the chamber b'choil. But that's not the way this chamber was. It was not divided east to west. It was divided north-south. It's very interesting. And the one to the east, ironically, which is further away from the Kodesh Kachim, further away from the holiest part of the temple, that was the Kodesh. The one that was to the west, Dafka there, that was Choil. Number one, we'll see how he proves that. And
how's that possible if it extends down into the south? So
very good, very good. Now, that's very good. And Shema Mina, that Shnei Psachim Ha'Yala, that there were two entrances to enter this chamber. One was opened by Kodesh, which means the way you entered it was by going through a doorway that opened it up to the Azara, and Ba'achas Pasuach B'Choil, and the other one had its door that went into Harabayas. Guys, Choil doesn't mean Choil, but relative to the Azara. And I will speak, we learned this already above, that the status of the chamber is determined by its doorway. Oh, so now let's go to what's Abaya's two rules. How does he prove both of them? Number one, the Isal Kadaitach all was Ba'Kodesh. Then how can it say that the Zakain, that the member of the Sanhedrin, that was appointed to be the overlooker over these lotteries, was sitting in the west? How can he sit in the west? Right, the master taught us, look how many sources he brings here to the side, that ein yeshiva ba'azara elul malchi beis David bilvat. It can be a Zakain and it can be a member of the Sanhedrin, but he's not malchi beis David. Sitting down means that wherever he sat, that is where it was the status of Choil. And where did he sit? In the western side of the chamber. And furthermore, well, say the whole thing was B'Choil. So the Gemara says, no, but then pious, and it says pious b'mizracha, if the mizrach of the chamber was Choil, which means you're telling me that the lottery happened outside of the Azara. No. In the house of Hashem, we have to walk with excitement. In other words, this excitement that was brought about through the pious was done where? Beis Elokim. Beis Elokim is not Harabayis. Beis Elokim, that has to be the Azara. And Veleka. So Elul Shmami no, Chetzi B'Kodesh, V'Chetzi B'Choil. Now, what's proof number two? Proof number two is that there were two doorways, because Isal Kadaitach Pesach Echad Yeshla, so Mimanavshach. If the one door would have been opened la kodesh, that means you only entered this chamber through walking through the Azara, which that would upgrade the status of the entire chamber. Doesn't matter, Danny, if it's geographically within the 18735 or if it goes outside. Remember, we learned that if you have a chamber, if it's about where is the doorway? So Zakin Yoshev b'Marava, how can he sit there? V'Hatanan, we learned in a Mishnah that halishka is that even if the entire lishka is built in Choil, imagine even if the whole lishka would be built in the area that normally will be viewed as Harabayis, but if upesucha is la kodesh, if they are opened, if the doorway goes to the Azara, then the entire chamber has a status of kodesh, toichem kodesh. Well, you don't know, that it doesn't mean it's mamish bonafide kodesh. No, because b'mitzias it's outside the boundaries of the Azara, but it has enough of the kedusha of the kodesh that no one is allowed to sit there. And he sat down. That means that the western side of the Lishkas Hagazis, the doorway went into the Choil, which is why it had a status of Choil. Now the same thing is also on the other side. The East Al-Kadaitach, that it was only opened lachoil if there was only one way to enter it from the Harabayas. Then again, how would they make the pious b'mizracha? Because then the pious would also be bachoil. Again, vatran, that even if it's benuya is bakoidish, if the way to enter the chamber is only through the choil, then that classifies the status of the chamber to the status of the doorway, and it would be toichan lachoil. And we just said the pious needed to happen bebeis aleikim. So therefore, Elalav Shmamina, that it must be that Shnei Psacham Hoyala, one was Pasuach B'Kodesh, and interestingly, the one that's Pasuach B'Kodesh was in the eastern side of the chamber. So therefore, that area of the chamber had a status of Kodesh. the lottery was done in the area that has Kedushas Azara, even if not totally, but primarily. And Ve'echad Pesuach L'choil, which was the western side, Pesuach L'choil, so there the Zakin was allowed to sit. Now, being that we have a relatively short daf today, it's very important to learn the second to last Tosfos here in the Amid. Look in the Tosfos. Ein Yeshiva Ba'azara. Tosfos has a very big question. Tema. The Amid B'Perek Beis Dizvachim. Uma Yoshev Sha'oichel Im Avad Chilel. He brings an ayah from a statement we have in Zvachim that the Kohanim, while eating the korbanos, were sit down. They would eat it sitting. Aside of the fact that it's more etiquette, right? It's proper to sit, to have a meal while sitting and not while standing. But he brings that ayah from the Gemara that they were sitting. So the question is, how was a kohen allowed to sit when he was eating? If ein yeshiva b'azara, ela l'malcha b'izdav bilvad. Ve'echi ochel v'ha'ein yeshiva b'azara. So Tosfos has various approaches. Number one, v'yesh shleimer, that whenever you're going to find in Chazal kohanim eating, it's dafke eating kachay kalam. Now, kachay kalam did not need to be eaten in Machna Shechina. Kachay kalam has to be eaten in Yerushalayim. You consider in Yerushalayim. And indeed, it doesn't mean that the kohanim would have to leave the whole temple complex, like we just learned right now. In the Lishkas HaGazis, the Ma'ariv side has a din of chayil. You can sit down there. So in order to eat sitting, they would go into that side, but they would only sit when they're eating kachim kalam. Inami oimeri bar Avraham. Listen to this. Ta'af al gav the ein yeshiva ba'azara elal malchabeis David. Zok Tosfos hanemilem lidvarim the lav tzoyrech avoidem. Aval achila. The eating of the meats of our korbanos, they are tzoyrech avoidem. That's how we look at it. As it says, va'ochlu oisam asher kupar bohem. Tell us Chazal sha'hakoyanim oichlem, and through the eating of the koyanim ba'olam ischaprim. So indeed, mishra sharei. And in Hasidus, we actually learn that achilas koyanim is even greater than achilas mizbeach. Just to get the oisius, that achilas mizbeach is the ending, the last step of the avoid of birurim. Once the food was already completely nivrar, and now you have to take food that already achieved purification, but you want to bring it up even to a higher level, and that's called in Kabbalah the avodah of yichudim, which comes dafka after the avodah of birurim. That is what happened through achilas kohanim. Just to understand the chashivus of the food that a tzaddik eats, and the reason why in almost all Hasidic groups there's a big to do with shirayim, because of this concept. That hakoyanim ochlim u'ba'olam ischaprim. And again, the achila of kahanim is even greater than achilas mizbeach. So therefore, that's not called sitting stam. Sitting and eating the meat of the kachay kachim is considered the avodah. And that is allowed to be done sitting down. Gavaldik. V'chulei and Tosfos. Okay, Chavre, let's go to the Mishnah. So let's begin. We began the Pedic. This is Pashat Gishmak. The first pious came about later, after the tragedies that happened. But the first pious was for the Trumas Hadesh. Pious number 2. Now, this wasn't that much later because, indeed, this was for the Korban Tamid. But as the Mishnah will speak out, there were 13 winners of the second Pious. Pious Hasheni was to determine what? So we're going through the Seder. Number 1, Mishoichet. Chavre, people jump. Shchita Kesheda Bezor. Yeah, Shchita Kesheda Bezor. But it's better for a client to do it. And if a kohen is going to do the shechita, it's not chaplap, since it's not anyone. We make a lottery for it. This is to prevent machlokesen, as we learned in the beginning of the Pedic. If not, God forbid, people can fight to the death to win the schus. Number 2, mizoyrek. What's missing? What are you kidding? It's not shechita zrika. There's Kabbalah and there's halacha. So this will be addressed in the Gemara. But by the fact that there was no lottery, not for the makabel, not for the one who's going to bring it, is a raya that it's one of these two. Because the premise is there was nothing giving out random. So if it's not mentioned, we don't need that over here. If it was not mentioned, it's already in. So either the shoichet will be the makabel or the zoyrik will be the makabel. Now, if the shoichet is the makabel, then we still don't know who does the halacha. Maybe it's shoichet, makabel, hoilach. If the Zoidik is the one that's Makabel, then it's already self-understood. Because if the Zoidik is Makabel, then Avadi is Makabel, and he does the Hoilach and he does the Zrika. And we'll leave that for the Gemara. So far we have two. Number three, Af Midashen Mizbeach Hapnimi, like we mentioned, that the Ketaitis was brought, but it needed to be put on a cleared out top of the inner golden altar. The inner golden altar still had some of the remnant of the ashes of yesterday afternoon's offering of the Ketaitis. Someone needed to clear it out. Remember, we learned also at the end of the first Perek that one of the Nisim that happened in the Beis Hamikdash that the Mishnah doesn't even mention is that when they would take out the ashes from the Mizbeach HaPnimi, as from the Menorah, they would place it right in the same tile where they would put the Trumas Hadeshen. And even though the floor of the Azara was a marble stone, it miraculously was absorbed in the ground through the stone. But let's go. Who did? There was Midash Mizbeach HaPnimi. So that's number three. Number four, who would clear out the menorah? Now, really, bepratim, there's a machlokes rishonim. How would they clear out the menorah? There are those who hold that the seven lamps of the menorah were not connected to the menorah proper, and the one who cleared it out, he would take off the lamp, and he would clear out the oil and the remnant of the wicks. We are familiar with this because by Hanukkah we do the same thing. Just by Hanukkah, not everyone is that, they don't, many people wait until the noon night, but they would do it in the morning. We spoke about the Hatavas Haneros. So either they removed the lamp or the lamp was part of the one block of the menorah, but they would have to clean it up by taking steps going up the lamp, be that as it may. That was Humi B'dash and menorah. Now, after we mentioned these four, Shoichet Zoyrek, Dishun Mizbeach, Dishun Menorah, now we're going to go to the Koren Tamid, meaning Umi ma'alei vadam lakevesh. Many parts were taken up, not one coin going back and forth. There was a lineup, there was a conveyor, there was a chevre, and each one was zoiche in another part. Now we're going to learn the seder of our Mishnah in the Tanach. Number one, haroish v'haregel, the head and the right hind leg. When you speak about yodayim, behemot yodayim, I mean, yodayim at the front, the four legs, and we're speaking about the regel means a hind leg, and it means the right hind leg, as many of us learn Talmud. The Rebbe wants us to learn these Masechtas every year during the 3 weeks. We should become familiarized with it. Number two, Ushtei HaYodayim, the two front legs, four legs. Number three, Ha'oiketz v'haregel, oiketz, taich, tail. But oiketz doesn't only mean the tail. I like this picture. So you can see the blue of Kevan's picture, that it's not just the tail, it's like the back of the animal, including the tail. And varegel means the left hind leg. Then number four, this is the fourth of the seder of bringing up the meat from where they dismembered it up until the lower half of the altar, like we spoke in the intro, because they wouldn't go straight up, they would place it there. Number four is the hachaza, the breast, the hageda. Now, geda literally means the neck. But as we can see, let's see the picture here, or you can see the other blue, that the neck doesn't only mean the neck, it means the entire front part of the animal, which would include the trachea and the lungs and the liver and the heart. Chevra, that's a lot. Number five, which they have the funnest, the two flanks, right? That's the white, that's a lot, that's the sides, that's huge. Number six, v'hakir bayim, the intestines. Now the intestines, remember we learned about a chamber. They would clean it inside a chamber, but then they would bring it up. That would be part of the items that go on the mizbeach. Number seven, v'hasoiles, the korban tamid, as many other korbanis, came with nesachim. Now nesachim literally means libations, that which is poured, but it doesn't only mean wine. It also came up with flour. So they brought up the flour that was already properly mixed with the oil. Now, even though together with the flour, chevra, comes the wine, but they were mafsik, because there was something else that was a flour korban that was brought every day, chavite kohen gadol, also divided in half in the morning, half in the afternoon, and they brought the soilus of the korban tamid and the chavitin of the kohen gadol, one back to back to the other. And then they brought the wine, like flour, like, type, nin b'minoi. V'hachavitin, that's number 8. And number 9, v'hayayin, the one who was zoicha to pour the wine. So says the Mishnah, even though we know how to count, that the total is 13. Shloisha asur kohanim zachaboy. Chavre, what's the 13? So we mentioned 9 when we spoke about the parts of the animal, which also then included the soiles, and the chavitin, and the yayin. But all of that is considered that it was 9 steps, but then we began with the first 4, right? The shoichet, the zoyrek, midashen mizbeach hapnimi, midashen the menorah. On that order, those 4 plus 9 has to dreitzen. Now, what's the big question? Exactly how did that work? Is it, the Gemara is going to ask that question in a moment, is it that he shouted out a number, took off a hat of 1, he shouted out number 770, and he went and he counted, and then there's the guy, 770, he's zoiche in the shchita. Does that automatically mean that the kohen to his right got the schus of the zrika, and the kohen to his right got the medishim mizbeach hapnimi? Was it that way? Was it one lottery, which automatically, once you have one winner, so then the 12 other kohanim automatically won? Or was there one separate piyus for each one? The Gemara is going to ask that question. However, when it comes to the Seder, and a big part of today's daf is about the Seder, Omar ben Azai lifnei Rabbi Akiva, in the name of Rabbi Yehoshua, that what? Not like the Tanach, but derech hilucha haya karev, and we're going to speak that out on Amud Beis. Which part means? What does it mean? That you didn't bring it up in the order of the Tanach. Look at an animal the way it walks while it is alive, which is basically you're looking at the animal from its roish. Right, the last thing will be the oikets. You can already get that. The last thing will be the tail. It goes pashut on the seder of it being alive, and then we'll see, like we mentioned, that on Amud Beis we're going to have 1 sheet of Ben Azai. We're going to have in that Baraisa another 3, a total of 4 different Sedarim, and it appears that our Tanach is not like any of the 4. But the Gemara will explain that the Tanach really, in principle, sides with one of the 4, and then we'll explain why is there bepoil a difference. Gavalik. All right. So as we spoke out, we have 13 people that won. The first question is, did they take off a hat and do the count 13 separate times? Did they shout out the number 13 separate times? Or no, they did one pious. Is it only la'avoida achas mefaisim? And like Rashi writes over here, I'm reading the words on Rashi, 8 lines from the bottom. Once you've established who is the first winner, who's the first Zoicha Begoidol, Shuvein Pious L'Shar Yud Beis Avoidus. You don't have to make another count and taking off the hats and going through the fingers. No. Elo Koyhanim Shemukafim Liyaminoi. It goes counterclockwise. So think about, imagine you're the guy in the middle. The one who won is facing you, right? So his right, the right of the Yid that's standing facing you is going counterclockwise. Mamish, going the opposite side of a clock, which is which is perfect. Is that what happened? That the one immediately to the right of the winner, not to your right, to his right, is the one that's Zoicha Dezrika. The third one is Zoicha L'Dishmas Be'achapnimi. The fourth one is L'Menaira. And V'chein Kulam, that's option number 1. Back in the Gemara, no. That they made a separate count for each one of these 13 avoidas. So the Gemara says, let's first try to analyze the words of our Mishnah. Tashema, our Mishnah means on that Chaf base, right? The last words that we had on the first Mishnah, the Pedic, the Mishnah says, Arba Payasois Choyesham. There were 4 lotteries. No. So Isak Adaita, L'chol Avoida, Hey Mefaisin, so then Tuvahava. Just in our Mishnah, you have already 13. The Mishnah says 4. So the Gemara says, Omar Av Nachman by Yitzchak, no. That's not a proof, because I can understand that Mishnah. Hachika Amar, Arba Pa'amim Nichnasim La'afis. There were 4, like we said, they didn't do it all together. There were 4 separate times that we got together to do a lottery, but maybe, but every time, like we're going into the Payasheni was for 13 schusim. Maybe Tuva Payasis. Maybe they actually did a count 13 separate times. So we're back to the Boyim. Daf Chafein Amid Beis. So Tashema, another attempted proof now from a Braisa. The Braisa says, Rebbe Yehuda Omer, listen to these words, Loi Haya Payas Lamachatam. Now we're not up to there yet. But whenever the Payas was made for the Ketairas, guys, you remember the expression we had in Yoma? It's called Chadoshim Leketairas. Chadoshim means because since whoever brought the Ketairas became wealthy, so they wanted to afford that segula to every coin. It's not fair for one to get that twice and one never to get it. So Chadasha means they would announce whoever is new, whoever never won the Ketreidus as of yet should b'chlal come into the circle. Now, when whoever won the Ketreidus means he was the Yid, he was the Kohen that put the incense on the coals. But how did the coals get on top of the Mizbeach HaPnimi? We learned in our Mishnah that they cleared it off. It was empty. Every morning, a Kohen needed to take a shovel full from the outer altar. There was a maracha on the outer altar from which you took glowing red embers and you would carry it into the Heichel, put it on the Mizbeach HaPnimi, and it was on those burning red hot coals that the Zacha Begoidel of the Ketreidus would put the Ketreidus on those coals. Now, who brought that shovelful? He's not mentioned. When we speak about the pious, he's not mentioned. So Rabbi Yehuda says indeed that loy hoya pious lamachto narvos then elokoyin shezacha b'ketoides oimer lozeh sheimai. He would turn to the one that's with him again to his right, and he would tell him zechei imi b'machto. Oh, help me out bringing in the shovel. So what's the raya from this braisa? That a single goydel is good for more than one person. So l'choira, a single goydel was for all the 13 people. Stam l'choira, when we mentioned that what we have nowadays that's most similar to the Ketreidus is the sandik by a bris, for which there's also this segula of becoming wealthy. And nowadays, some people have sandik meyushav, sandik mu'umid. Just l'choira, that by the Ketreidus, there were also two kohanim that were involved. One for the Ketreidus. Prior to him, one brought the coals. Maybe that's that. On the other hand, actually, if you say the one who brought him the coals did his avodah before the Ketreidus was brought. So maybe that would include, the chayka, that would maybe include the people that have some sort of schus before the bris. If the bris is the Ketreidus, so maybe it includes in the segula people prior to him. Anyways, back over here, the Gemara says that this braisa does not conclusively resolve the inquiry, because I could argue, no, shani machta v'ketoides, it's really the same. In other words, you need the coals in order to put the ketoides upon it. So that's why only one lottery was made. But shchita, my friends, and pouring the wine, shchita and clearing out the menorah, two different things. So maybe you needed to have two different payasos. Ikadamri, other people say that this braisa was actually brought to prove initially the opposite side of the boya. Dafka machto ketoides. You see that Rabbi Yehuda says a chiddush, but only by this avoid of ketoides, because it's self-understood the chad avoidi. Actually, let's extrapolate. Avol sha'or avoidos fakert. Every avoida, if it's separate, needs its own piyus. So the Gemara says for that, no, that also was not a conclusive proof, because I can argue machta itzrichalei. No, really. By all of the different stages, only one lottery was done. And then automatically, like here, all of the 13 won. Whoever won the first took with him along the one to his right and the one to his right. Why did Rabbi Yehuda, why did the Braisa have to speak about over here? Because here there's a chiddush. Like we mentioned, right? It's something so special. It's relatively not that common, even though it's done twice a day, but for whatever reason, it's called leishchicha. And uma'atra, it made you wealthy. So maybe niskin lapais bifnei atzma. Then from here zaraya that the one who did another part of the ketores also got the segula for becoming wealthy. I don't know if that goes to the sandik mu'umad, but maybe it goes to the chayka. Maybe the chayka is the biggest kibbutz, the one that that's all they gave me. The guy who got upset is becoming wealthy. But anyways, so you would think that here you should make a separate one. So that's the chiddush, that even here you only make one. It could be understood that way. Bottom line is we're back to the boya. So now the Gemara says, Tashema, the Tani, the Bechia. Now it was common that the Amoraim did not have access to all of the braises. So they can have a boya, but then someone informed them it's a befeidah shebraisa. That loy l'chol avodah v'avodah mafaisim. Clearly, you didn't make for every schus another count. No, Elo koyin shezacha b'tamid. Automatically, shneim asar echav akayanim neshachim imay befeidish. Shma mina, that was one lottery. The shoichet was mezaka with him, the one to his right, and then the one to his right on the seder of our Mishnah, or following the other Sodanim that we will have here on Amud Beis. It says the Gemara, referring back to the Mishnah, Payos Hasheni. right? That's how the Mishnah began. Second pious, the first pious was Trumas Hadeshin. Second pious was Shoichet and Zoidik. Now, what's about the Makabel? Doesn't go Shchita Zrika, go Shchita, Kabbalah, Hoilacha, and Zrika. So Ibaylahu mi Makabel. The Gemara doesn't have to ask who's the Moilech, because it's going to be self-understood. And what's the premise? The fact that the Mishnah says that there wasn't a stand-alone Zoicha Begoidel for the Kabbalah, it must mean nothing was given random. It must mean that either the Shoichet or the Zoidik has to be the Makabel. So what we have to ask is which one of these two, winning one automatically made them one the other. Do we say that the Shoichet is the Makabel? Because the I Amrat Zoidik Makabel, what's the downside of having the one that's Zoidik, not the Shoichet, doing the Kabbalah? So Agav Chavivusei, have to understand that people were pashat excited to do the Avodah, as we should all be. So if I'm the Zoidik and I want, let's say, the Kabbalah, we spoke this out in the intro, ideally, all of Dam HaNefesh, lifeblood, we'll leave that for Zvachim, but all of it should be received in the Mizrach. Even though if some of it fell on the floor, as long as you have the minimum amount in the Mizrach, you can do the mitzvah of the Zrika. But ideally, you should receive all of it. So if the Shoichet is not going to do the Zrika, he'll take his time. He'll only pass on the Mizrach. Fakert, he wants to hold on to it as much as he could. But if the Zoidik will be doing the Kabbalah, so Agav Chavivu say lo mekabel kulei dam, and therefore it won't be done on a lechatchila dik way. That will be the logic that the Shoichet should be the Makabel. However, the other side of the deal, no Zoidik Makabel, because the Iyamrat Sheikhel will be Makabel. Since there is a rule that Shchita is Ksheira Bizar, Shchita is Ksheira Bizar, if people will be habituated to see that the Shoichet is the Makabel, a terrible thing will happen. That the Shoichet, if the Shoichet will be a non-Kohen, he'll do the Kabbalah because we're used to the Shoichet doing the Kabbalah. So we never want the Shoichet to be the Makabel. So which one is it? So Tashema, we're quoting a Braisa, Ben Katan is a name of a Kohen Gadol, that he went ahead and also Yud Beis Dad Likir. He made 12 spouts to the Kir. The Kir that we read about in the Chumash, made by Betzalel, had 2 spouts. Based on this Mishnah, based on this Torah Shebal Peh, that one pious, the pious for the Talmud Shel Shachat, really covered 13 Kohanim. Now, something is important that's not written here. Even though the first one is Shoichet, and like we spoke in the Mishnah, Shchita Ksheira B'Zar, but ideally a Kohen should do it. And if a Kohen did it, it was done by lottery. But since the Shchita could be done by a Zar, the Shoichet, the Kohen, did not need to be Mekadosh his hands and his feet prior to the Shchita, even though a Kohen is doing it, because it's something that could be done by a Zar. So who is obligated to wash their be Mekadosh Yadayim V'Raglayim before the other 12? So he made a Kiyar that already had 12 spouts, not having a lineup, but everyone at the same time can be Mekadosh Yadayim V'Raglayim. Let's read it inside. Ben Kotin also Yud Beis Dad L'Kiyar Kidei Sheyu Yud Beis Echav HaKayanim. Which 12? The ones that we mentioned. Aside of the Shoichet that doesn't need to be Mekadosh. Ho'asukin b'tomim mekachmi dein ragleim b'bas achas b'dafne shvarten one for the other. Now, says the Gemara Gavaldik, Shchita could be Ksheira B'Zar. And second, that the Shoichet is the Makabel, and that's not the Zoidik. How can we exclude the Shoichet? Shchita is Ksheira B'Zar, and therefore he doesn't have to be Mekadosh Yadayim V'Raglayim. That's only if he's only doing the Shchita. If he's doing the Kabbalah, no, Kabbalah, Mikabbalah, Ve'elach, it's a chiyuv to be done by a Kohen. So he should have made a Kiyar that has 13 spouts. Telei Sahava, Elolaf, Shmami, no. Gavaldik, that the Zoidik is the Makabel. And the Zoidik is one of the following 12. The Shoichet is not the Makabel. The Shoichet Takad never has to be Mekadosh his hands and his feet. Now, by the way, now that we established that the Zoidik is the Makabel, now we don't have to speak about who does the Haylacha. Because if the one who was Mekabel is going to put the dam on the Mizbeach, of course he does the Hoylacha. And it's Gavaldik, because since Shchita is Ksheira B'Zor, we're separating the Shchita from the Zrika. So one kind is the Shchita, and then negate weiter. Now that we proved it from this Braisa, I have a Beferish Mishnah and Talmud. Now, by the way, this is a problem, because if it's a Beferish Mishnah and Talmud, then what was even the inquiry? And why didn't someone bring the Mishnah? But let's read the Mishnah. There's a Mishnah. It says, Shachat HaShoichet. The Mishnah is going through the Seder of the Talmud of the morning. Shachat HaShoichet. V'kibel HaMekabel. Ubal loy lizraik. And he went to throw it. Clearly. And he, who's the he? The Mekabel. You see that the Mekabel did. Now you can't say it's all the same person. We know from our Mishnah that Shchita was one person, and the Zrika was someone else.
Wow.
So it must be Shachat HaShoichet Kama, one yid, one coin, then V'kibel HaMekabel, Baloy Lizraik. Now the problem is, again, it's such a good proof. What was even the boyer? They all knew all these Mishnayos by heart. I was thinking to myself, maybe, if you look inside the Rashi here, Rashi writes, Ubaloy Lizraik Garsinon. I think what Rashi is trying to say is that there was two girsois in the Mishnah and Talmud. Now, I don't know what the other girsa was, but the other girsa did not lead us to this understanding. So
hang on.
they didn't know the B'nai said they didn't have the right girsa in the Mishnah. That's the way I understand it. So then they brought in the base Midrash. No, guys. Let me tell you the right version of the Mishnah and Talmud. And once that was established as that's the girsa, that also clarified that the Mekabel is the Zoydik. Let's go on. So after the Tanakama gave the Tanakama's order of the Eivarim being brought up, then the Mishnah quoted the second opinion, who was quoted by Ben Azai, in front of Rabbi Kiva in the name of Rabbi Yehoshua. Lest you think there are two opinions, really it is going to appear that there are five opinions, but really there are only four. And these are the four opinions that we have in the Brais. Tana Rabbanan, Keitzad Derech Hiluchai. Right, because the Mishnah, the Tanakama, Pashit, he went through all of the steps, correct? And here, Ben Azai just says, no, I argue, from the head to the back. But he didn't speak out. So this Brais is more elaborate, Keminik the Braises. Number one, Harosh Varagel. You're going to jump and ask, hold on, if it's Derech Hiluchai, means first the front of the animal, then you go orderly to the back. My friends, the leg is the back. The right hand, the right hind leg. I don't know if those charts will help. So we'll see later why Lakula Alma with the head has to come the regel.
Rabbi, is this all rabbinical? Is this all rabbinical derived? Is this all from the rabbis? Because I was thinking, how would Aaron and his children do all this?
Okay, so Baruch is bringing up a good point. The most similar the most similar mitzvah, and your point is well taken, but your conclusion is not necessarily correct, are the tefillin that we wear. We're going to have in Menachos, and even we put on Baruch 2 pairs of tefillin that have the same portions, but they are ordered in a different way. They have a different seder. Really, there are 4 pairs of tefillin. Raivet and Shimush Rabba, and the Rashi and the Rabbeinu Tam. So the question is, Baruch, one second, how were there 4 different orders? Why don't we look at the tefillin of Moshe Rabbeinu? And the answer there is that we are connecting to different levels of godliness. And Bachlal, again, they have different oilamis, going from the lowest to the Asiyah, Yitzira, Bria, and Atzilus. And from the outset, there were different pairs of tefillin. It wasn't that the Rabbeinu Tam made up a pair of tefillin. So I would argue, Baruch, that from the beginning, there were 4 different opinions how to bring it up. And they're all correct. And Elo Divrei Elikim Chaim. And it could even be that certain Yidden needed that Seder. Other Yidden needed another Seder. Or certain Kohanim were connected. They lived in a different world. And in that world, the animals were ordered in a different way. We'll speak about this more, but that's a very important point. Let's go weiter. So they say that it's pashut easy. It looks like it's technical, but it's very meaningful. So the first opinion is first the head and the right hind leg. Then the chaz and the gator. Guys, we already touched these words in the Mishnah, so we're not going to repeat them again. So the breast and the neck, as we said, including a lot more. Number 3, ushtei yadayim, the two forelegs. Number 4, ushtei the fanos. And number 5, the ha'oiketz v'haregel. Tak ha'oiketz v'haregel. Here we have the tail, and at least the left foot went last. Opinion number 2 in the Braisa, that the order was called derech hefsheitoi, the way the animal was skinned. Now the animal was skinned is that after they did the shechita, they would actually cut off the head entirely. After the shechita, they would hang the animal up by its leg, and you would skin it. It's when you have the animal flipped upside down. So when you're skinning it, you're beginning first with the hind part of the animal, and you're going towards the front. And now the Braisa speaks out. So what was the Seder? First, Horosh Varegel. Everyone begins with the head. Even though Derech Shetoi, by the way, the head was not the skin. The head was the only part of the animal that was brought on the altar with its skin on it. We'll get to these details later, as much as we could. Number 2, Ha'oiketz Varegel. The tail and the left hind foot. Number 3, Shtei Lefanis, the 2 flanks. Number 4, Shtei Yadayim, the 2 forelegs. Number 5, you see Achazav Agedi. You see the front, the breast, the chest, and the neck. Rabbi Akiva, opinion number 3 says, no, Derech Nituchi, the way it was dismembered. After they would skin it, right, they would then dismember it, and this is the seder of dismembering it. Always the head and the right hind leg. Number 2, Shtei Yadayim. Number 3, Achazav Agedim. Number 4, Shtei Lefanis. Number 5, Ha'oiketz Varegel. And the 4th opinion in the Braisa, Rabbi Yosef Glili says, no, Derech Iluyoi, in the order of its quality. Not the way it walks when it's alive, not the way it's skinned, not the way it's dismembered. Which limb is considered of greater quality? That is brought prior to the limb that halachically is considered one of lesser quality. Zok the Braisa says Rabbi Yossi Haglili, we'll call him Rabbi Yossi, Harosh v'haregel. Everyone agrees with the first is the head and the right hind leg. Now we go. Number 2, Achaza v'agedam. Number 3, Shtei Lefanis. Number 4, Ha'oiketz Varegel. Number 5, Shtei Yadayim. Okay. Problem here, according to Rabbi Yossi Haglili, right, he's writing that the fanois, that the flanks, and it's more chashuv than the regel. It's more chashuv than the left hind leg. Frag the Gemara on that. How can you say that the flanks, which have in it we'll see in a moment, the shoulder's part of the flanks, that is more chashuv than the left hind leg, when it says, kol netach toiv, all good cuts, and look at the order of a pasuk in Yecheskel. First, yarech, the thigh means the legs, and here, that would be the left hind leg. I know the right hind leg has to be brought with the head. And after the pasuk mentions the thigh, then it mentions the shoulder, which is part of the flanks. It's the opposite of the order of Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Answers the Gemara, no. Ahu, that context, look at context. That pasuk of Yecheskel is speaking about a wicked person who steals animals from the poor. Poor people can't feed their animals, so the animals are very lean. By a lean animal, the leg, the thighs, because of its muscles, it's bigger than the shoulders. But when you have an animal that has a balabas that gives it food, when the animals fatten up, then the shoulders are more fleshy than the hind legs. Pashut practical. Says the Gemara, if you look at the Mishnah, Pashut, there's not enough time, but if you put it on the chart, you will notice that our Mishnah follows no Seder. So one will think that the Mishnah has another sheet, a 5th sheet, the Tanakama. Ben Azai is the same Ben Azai. So says the Omar Rabba, listen like this. Ben Tanadi done. Our Mishnah follows the concept, the premise of Rabbi Yossi Haglili. Derech Iluyoy, the order of quality. Ben Tanadi done, Ben Rabbi Yossi, Basar Iluyoy, the Bisras Lina, Narbos then, Mar Ozil. Our Mishnah says, Basar Evara, the Bisra. We go after which limb has the most meat. How do you define quality? That's a big argument. So is it the one that has the most meat, or is it the one that has the most fat? And there's chashivus to fat. So our Tana says, no, meat is chashiver. Umar, which is Rabbi Yossi, Azar Basar Shamno the Bisra. Weiter. Says the Gemara, my Talmud, that the Salka Regel Bahadireshim. I get it. Everyone mentions the head first. We're not even challenging that. But everyone is putting the right hind leg with the head. How does it even work? Let's go to Benazai in the Mishnah. Derech Hiluchai. How Derech Hiluchai should leave both legs for the last? Says the Gemara like this. The head comes first, but Shum the reish in the fishy beyatzomai, since there are many bones in the head, so it's not considered a respectable offering to God Almighty. So karvar regel bahadei, to make it more respectable, and we just mentioned that there is a nice amount of meat on the legs, so you bring the leg with it. And we'll speak out in a moment more. Al pi Kabbalah, right? Al pi Pnimius, the concept of notes tchilos and besoifon, the head and the foot, atzilus and asiyah. Let's go weiter. The kula almamiyas roish karaveresha. Okay, but everyone says the head goes first. Again, minolan. And you would argue again, derech hiluchay, no problem. Well, let's just go derech hefshetoi. Or, why the head first? So the Braisa, the Tanya, Minayin l'roish upeder. Now we're going in through a nuance that was not even mentioned in the Mishnah. Guys, there are certain hard fats, we'll learn about them in Chulin, that covered the innards of the animal. That's called peder. All of that was brought on the Mizbeach. But actually, another detail, when they would cut the head off the animal, they didn't want to bring the head up on the Mizbeach with its incision exposed. It's red, it doesn't look clean, even though the cut was not facing the Mizbeach, it was facing the holder, the kohen still. So they would cover it with peder. So the Braisa says clearly, Minayin l'roishu peder shekoyim l'chol eivarim. Forget about the regel, just the roish. Talmud Loiman, now here's Gavadik. If you have a chumash, you appreciate these Braisas. In the beginning of Vayikra Aleph, we're going out of the order. There's pasuk Yud Beis and there's pasuk Ches. Both of these verses, I'm just going to read out loud verse 12. It says, V'nitach oisoi l'nasacha. We're speaking about cutting up the Talmud Shel Shachar. Ve'es roishoi ve'es pidroi. That's all it says there. Doesn't even mention the other parts of the animal. So since it said, and then it says va'arach, and he brings it up. It says es roishoi ve'es pidroi va'arach. Clear. Furthermore, if you look 2 or 3 verses prior, 4 verses prior, by Yikra Aleph Pasuk Ches, let me just read what it says. It says that va'orchu b'nei aharon hakoyanim eis hanesachim. They bring up the cut pieces, es haroish ve'es hapader. Now here you have a b'chal akasha. Why do you have to have the same exact thing mamish twice? For some reason, the Yud Beis is the Iker, and the Braisa is asking, Oy bazoi v'idach peder achrina l'mai asa. Why did the Torah have to write prior in Pasuk Ches Peder? Says Rashi, why are we not asking about the Rosh? Rosh is also written twice. So Ayin and Rashi explains, Rosh has to be written twice because the Rosh is not even the skinned. But the Peder, why? So look at the Tanya, that Kates at Hoya Oisa, how did they bring up the head? In order for the head to be considered a respectable gift to God Almighty, they would take these hard fats and they would place them on the area of the incision. It looks like as an ice cream cone, the picture that he's putting up over here, but that's more or less what they did. And they would bring it up. And because the incision is stained with blood, it doesn't look good, so they would cover it. This is a side of the additional cover that we did by adding the regel. So so let's go back to what we mentioned before. There are 2 siddharim, and they correspond. Let me just speak out one gavaldik word that we have. We're learning this together now in Parshas Emoir, and we're learning here after davening. We learn Lekutei Torah. Let me share a maimer that the Alter Rebbe writes regarding Vehenefes Ha'omer. The Alter Rebbe points out the following: that if you look in the Torah to the word lamb, you'll notice this now. Sometimes the Torah writes lamb by keves, chaf, vez, shin. And other times the Torah writes kesev, chaf, shin, vez. It's all the same lamb. Why is there a change in the order of the letters? This is, I think, very much connected to it. And the Alter Rebbe explains that vez goes to chachma, to the level of chachma. Shin, so it depends. In the lower worlds, shin goes to the midos that come after the mind. The midos are be'ikr, the 3 kavim of chesed, gevurah, tiferes. So if the animal is connecting us to its spiritual counterpart, the chayas hakodesh of the lower worlds, there, the vase comes before the shin. That's the normal seder. First there is the mind, and then there are feelings. But if the animal is trying to connect us to the godliness of the source of this animal, of the Chayas HaKodesh, from even the higher worlds, over there, the Shin, the Alter Rebbe explains, corresponds to Keser, what's sometimes called Turei, the Chashaycha, the dark mountains. We have in the Gemara the dark mountains, it means a higher level. It's dark. Keser is dark because we don't know it. And over there, the source of Midas is above Seichel, which is why Midas are so much more powerful than Seichel. So it's amazing that Alter Rebbe is explaining Al Pi Chasidus that whenever the Torah writes the word kesev, we are connecting to a higher level of godliness. And going back l'chayr over here, these 4 sedarim, they correspond to these animal spiritual counterparts. And every word, the animal is mesudar in a different way. And the point of the carbon is to draw down into the world a higher level of kedusha, from which world l'chayr that will be connected to these 4 sedarim, and v'tein l'chacham v'yech kamoid, exactly how that works to be continued.
Shkoyach.